I want to set the scene for you, dear Underdog podcast listeners. It's summertime. It's quiet in my house for the first time, and I can't remember how long. Everybody's out of the house, and the dog is settled. The cat is in the other room, and I have a moment to collect my thoughts and share an idea that's been percolating around in my head for this community. The topic I want to talk about today is 7 strategies, tips, advice, changes, you call it what you want, 7 of them to help you stop throwing yourself under the bus. And other stories of self-sabotage. So, I want to acknowledge that self-sabotage is still something I struggle with. I'm much better at it, though. I have to say, I've gotten much better. And then the minute you identify it, it becomes so much easier. So maybe listening to this podcast, you'll start to see ways where you throw yourself under the bus for many reasons we're going to discuss a little bit later, and try to understand what the core behavior is behind that so that you can stop doing that, live your best life, be the best leader you were supposed to be, and enjoy things. I need to share that the inspiration for this podcast came from a coaching call I had with a young woman, and she is primed for leadership. She is embodiment in some ways of the Underdog Leadership podcast community, a fantastic number 2, looking to make her next step into number 1. And there's these behaviors that kept coming up that she kept identifying. I've taken some of hers and some of mine, and that gap between supporting and leading. And that's what I really want to kind of dive into today. And the reality is too that those are subtle adjustments in how we show up, and they can make massive changes on the way we're perceived. So if you know anything about me, you know about the book, big swallow there, Embracing Ambition, Empowering Women to Step Out, Be Seen, and Lead. And we talk in the book, one of the pillars is perception barriers, how you're not perceived as a leader. And my premise for this podcast is those are actually just habits. And because they're habits, you can actually change them. You can play with them. You can adapt them so that you're perceived differently. I'm not talking about changing who you are. I'm talking about shifting some of your behaviors for maximum effect. So again, the typical client, the kind of person that uses these behaviors or that chooses not to after this podcast use these behaviors is ambitious. I just want to start with that. Keen to make change in the world, ready to get out there, try things. Very compassionate, somebody who cares deeply about others, doesn't want to hurt feelings. Kindness for me is like a core value. It's a tenet of how I show up in the world. And I want to say kind, not nice, right? I want to be kind to others and speak the truth that they need to hear. Sometimes the people I work with are really creative and artistic, and they have big ideas and they live in their heads sometimes. And so when we get to leadership, sometimes paring things down can actually be really helpful as a goal. So let's dive into these sort of 7 habits, 7 ways to stop throwing yourself under the bus. I love that title. I'm just going to keep repeating it. The first thing that I'd like you to think about is being more decisive, or on the flip side of that, being less indecisive. Let me describe what that looks like. As you go through leadership, one of the things you do as you're going through management, is you bring everything to the table because you want your direct report to see all the options and for them to have weigh in or seek feedback or all those kinds of languages. And sometimes we bring too much to the table. We abdicate our responsibility for things by letting others make decisions. And I don't know a great leader on the planet that doesn't want people, direct reports, to come with them with ideas and proposed solutions. So one of the things I'd like you all to think about is how you can be more decisive at your sessions. And what I mean by that is also women tend to be very collaborative. So they like to think things through. And the purpose of this particular habit is, can you pare down your thinking so that you're bringing 2 or 3 or 4 ideas, not the whole kitchen sink with you? Number 2 kind of ties into this actually. And this is something I learned when I was a board chair. I wanted to do it all. I wanted the agendas that I would write for our meetings would be ridiculously long. And of course we would never get through it. And really it was a lack of leadership on my part in hindsight, that I should have done a better job of paring down that agenda, being more specific on what was most important, and being okay to let go of what was less important. And that comes with time. And you really want to think about the fact that time is a super scarce commodity for a leader. Anybody who's transitioned from a number 2 to number 1 knows all of a sudden you don't understand the files as well as you used to, and you don't have time to understand the files as well as you used to. And you've got to rely, hopefully, if you're leading well, on the people around you to give you that advice. So tighter agendas, lesser is more. I wrote the word scatterbrained here. It's not that we think we're scatterbrained, but we may come off as being scatterbrained. Do you see what I mean? Because you bring too many things and you kind of dump it all on somebody's plate. So my suggestion, my shift here is bring fewer things, test out how this works, hold yourself to timelines. That's another habit I see is people putting boxing time for meetings and then having them go way overboard, right? You as a leader need to take responsibility for your time blocking and how much time you've allocated for things, and either change the time blocking. Do we really need an hour and a half meeting? Maybe we do. Or really calling out, is this a half hour meeting kind of a conversation? Owning your time and your time management. That is what a great leader does. Okay. Another habit number 4, and I've been doing more of this both in the parenting style and in the leadership style. Sometimes just naming where I'm stuck really helps me. So being more specific with the ask. So full true story. This morning I said to my husband, "Okay, do you want to do the eggs or do you want to take Charlotte to school?" And so offering alternatives and being really specific with the ask. I can tell you in the past, I probably would have just ruminated and hoped he'd pick one out of my head that I hadn't actually articulated to him. But he was supposed to be a mind reader and figure it out for me and then walk around feeling like I was slighted all day. So really being specific, and also when you ask for feedback, don't abdicate all of your power. So can you have a look at this? To me, as a number 2 asking a number 1, that's really open. As a number 1, I might think they want me to rework the whole thing. But actually, I might just want their feedback on the title, or I might want their feedback on my strategy. So trying to be more specific on what you'd like their thoughts on, game changer. Oh my God, game changer on this one. And also that, I don't know if you've heard the podcast from this series, because I'm recording in the summer and I've got the whole episodes for the season chalked out. But you're going to hear me talk a lot about valuable, capable, and reliable. We trust as leaders that the people around us are valuable, that we value their opinions, that they're capable, that they can do their jobs, we're not sabotaging them, and that they're reliable, that they can hold themselves to the accountability. So being specific allows them the freedom to also focus in where they're needed. Number 5, I've written death to self-sabotage. This is a pleaser habit. This is the time where you use self-deprecation or you diminish your skills, you take it on the chin to make others feel more comfortable. And, you take the blame, and sometimes it's not actually yours. It's not yours to own, but by taking the blame, you take away the uncomfortable moment in the meeting. You take away, you take the responsibility on yourself to deflect from something else. This is a model of self-sabotage and self-deprecation. It is not serving you as a leader, because when you do that, you start to be, gosh, do I want to say it? The dumping grounds for all the problems. And it starts to add up in your head, in your mind, and you start to believe this stuff. So, from listening to this podcast today, folks, one thing, if there's one thing I want you to take away, is question mark, question mark. Do I sabotage my strengths or self deprecate myself in order to make others feel more comfortable? Let me give you a real example from my life. I haven't worked this one through yet, but I think that one of my inabilities to win ladder matches in tennis is because I don't like the feeling of winning, because I'm thinking so much about the other person losing. And that is a paradigm and a core belief that's been around for me for a long time. We know women don't like the concept of winning and losing. They like the idea of amplifying, augmenting, uplifting, elevating, so that there's this idea of this collective uplifting. The black and white of winning and losing is not a core belief for women the way it is for play with men, for example, on the playground, boys and girls. So I actually need to take this one. I'm holding myself accountable on this podcast. I love the vulnerability here. Gosh, Jenny, what did you get yourself into? Of doing some journaling about why it is that I assume that me winning means they lose. It's the same idea around money. If I have money, somebody else doesn't have money. That is not necessarily true, but I have taken it as a truth. You see what I'm up to? So I will noodle on that one. But that is a way I believe I self-sabotage myself in ladder matches. To be continued. I will give you an update. Or send me your thoughts over email. I'd love to hear if anybody else up there, because I find I play better when I'm behind in tennis. That's where I'm sort of getting it from. Again, my email is Jenny with a Y, Jenny@chavender.com. Chavender like lavender. Would love to hear your thoughts about that. Okay, we're on to number 6. Are you still with me? This was actually the phrase my client used, and I loved it so much I've stolen it from her. She said, "I like a lighter touch with everything." Ah, that vision of simplifying, that vision of I'll make the decision for now, that vision of not overthinking, over analyzing. Sidebar, my word of the summer is simplify. So I'm actually having, what do you call them? People that come in and do your closets and clean things out in my kitchen, having them in. And I'm really looking forward to learning their techniques and skills because you know me, I love to learn from experts. So I hire people in my world to come in and teach me things. That's how I got better at selling. That's how I got better at building the business. I hired coaches. So that word simplify really resonates with me, and I'm really trying to get unstuck. And here's the kicker. It's usually myself that I'm stuck in. It's rarely is it somebody else's stuff I'm stuck in. And really trying to quiet my brain, get more done, not get stuck. And the for now is kind of my ... that I've been using. Well, I don't need to schedule that ... for now. Well, this is something that I can make a decision to hear ... for now. So a lighter touch with everything. I mean, when I say that, it's like my shoulders just drop an inch. Anybody else? Okay. Number 7, another good one. I think, I'm a Pisces, so I can see things from all different directions. And if there's one thing I've learned over my years of coaching, helping people, and also I just want to call it building a business and inviting people to make decisions. People like clarity. They like hope and they like clarity. They like to know what to do, how to do it, or whatever. And so I am really working hard on my own speeches, presentations, podcasts, words, anything on being a great editor of myself, of self selecting the key messages that are most important to me to get across and zip, quiet, keeping the other ones at bay. So in the past, it's funny when I listen to my old podcasts and I'm doing an interview with people, one of the things I hear is I ask a question and then I qualify the question with more words. Anybody else do that? And I'm working in my podcast when I interview people to really ask succinct questions. That's actually a tenet of coaching. As coaches, we're not supposed to fill up the air with our words. We're supposed to be listening and asking succinct, thoughtful questions to prompt a reaction or a feeling from our coachees. So being a good editor, really, really important. Final bonus is if you're having trouble sort of seeing yourself as a leader, this almost becomes about embodying the leadership role so that you start believing yourself as a leader. Like I remember one of my clients, I loved her, loved this word. She said, walking around saying, I am a leader, that self-affirmation, that self-validation, and how by owning that, it actually does trickle down and shift your behaviors and your actions in a day-to-day basis. If you can't find that today, no worries. There's always tomorrow, first of all. And second of all, name a woman that you admire, the way that she leads, the way she holds a room. And when you're stuck, ask yourself, what would so-and-so do, right? One of my mentors or the people that I really look up to is a gentleman named Malcolm Gladwell, who writes revisionist history or is a podcaster, and he writes books and all sorts of things. You might know David and Goliath or The Tipping Point. He's sort of a thought provoker, and I really love the way he frames his arguments. So sometimes when I start a presentation or I start the ideas for a podcast, I'll ask myself, well, what would Malcolm Gladwell do? And I just love that reframing for myself. So let's take a moment here and walk through the 7 topics, the 7 ways you can stop throwing yourself under the bus. Number 1, you want to work on being a little bit more decisive. Do you love how I say a little bit more? That's too funny. Being more decisive, bringing fewer things to the table, options, but never more than 2 or 3. People don't like more options. They get option overload. Trust me, when I'm trying to nowadays on the Instacart thing, when I'm trying to do Uber Eats or whatever, and they ask me all these millions of questions, it definitely inhibits me from getting to the end of the damn request for food, right? Keep it simple. Better agendas, being tighter with your agendas, trying not to throw in the kitchen sink. You can be perceived as scatterbrain when you do that. Go tighter and know and plan for those agendas for where you want to get to, not where you want your boss needs to get to. You are a part of that equation. Being much more specific about naming where you're stuck rather than asking for feedback. Be really specific about where you're asking for feedback. Number 5 was death to self-sabotage. Just stop doing it. You don't need to throw yourself under the bus. You don't need to make yourself less to make other people feel more comfortable. And if this is so weird and foreign for you, just take more time for silence, because usually the words that come afterwards are the self-deprecating ones. So just talk less when it comes to an awkward situation. Going to feel really weird for our pleasers out there. I'd love to hear from you, by the way, on that. A lighter touch with everything. Just simplify. Just trust yourself. I love it. So easy to say. Just trust yourself. And add that word "for now" into the bottom. And finally, really working hard to be a great editor of yourself, trusting that all of your ideas are valid, but wanting to make the best impression and choosing to be selective. Choosing to be selective about which parts of you show up for other people. So at the end of this coaching moment, accountability moment, you've listened to this podcast. Which 1 or 2 things are you going to take away from this and actually implement? I would love to hear from you how that goes. And I also just want to highlight that executive coaching, working with someone to shift and change some of these behaviors, they're not impossible to change. They're your habits, therefore you can change them. But I will tell you that putting money on a table and investing in yourself, that is a complete change of energy. And it really, the accountability that comes with saying, I'm ready for this, has been incredibly humbling to watch, first of all, for my clients, but also I've experienced it myself when I put money down to invest in a coach or a learning or a skill set that I feel I'm ready to be a part of. And if your aspiration is to move from a number 2 to number 1, and you are ambitious and you're worried that that fire in your belly might be kind of fading, don't give up. Bring yourself back. Ask yourself what you need. What would the oxygen be to get back on that horse, to step back in that ring, to change some of those behaviors? I am 100% with you, and I would love to hear your journeys. If you have stories about that, or if you're looking for someone to follow you on the journey, my absolute pleasure to be a part of it. Jenny Mitchell at the end of this podcast. Go be great.